Well, the push is on to expand the euthanasia law. We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming when the law was first passed. The slippery slope. But we were told by politicians and the media and the supporters of euthanasia, oh, don't be silly. There's no slippery slope. Well, it's only taken them less than 3 years to prove us right. So there's concrete evidence from the countries which have introduced euthanasia that the availability and application of euthanasia expands to other situations, because when a newly permitted activity is characterised as a human right, the right to die, the overseas experience is that there's an inevitable push to extend such a right to a greater number of people, those with chronic conditions, disabilities, mental illness, those simply tired of life, or even children. So in today's McBLOG, I want to check out a few recent cases, first overseas and then locally. And this is the first one. It's a story. A judge has issued a ruling that clears the way for a 27-year-old woman to be accepted into Canada's euthanasia program, despite the attempts of her father to prevent it. She met all the qualifications, but she wasn't required to provide information about her symptoms or how they made her suffer. All her parents have seen is that their daughter has followed the correct procedure. And the father argues that the doctors were wrong to conclude that her daughter met the euthanasia criteria. He told the courts she was diagnosed in 2016 with autism spectrum disorder. She's got a long history of seeking medical diagnoses for physical ailments, but no diagnosis has ever been made. And he says it's unclear whether she suffers from any physical condition at all. He speculates that she may suffer from psychological conditions that cause her to believe that she suffers from physiological symptoms. Now, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is like Radio New Zealand, they also reported that currently you need 2 doctors or nurses to get, or practitioners, nurse practitioners, to pass the mark to get euthanasia. One agreed, one didn't. So then they found a third tie-break doctor. In other words, you shop around for the ones who will say yes. So when you remove the terminal aspect, which we have in our law, going to die in 6 months, but they want to do away with that, you could end up with this type of situation, euthanasia for autism. The judge said death, dignity and right to self-determination outweigh parents' concerns. Well, it's a right to self-determination, even if it's wrong. And then to the Netherlands. Ter Beek, which is her name, once had ambitions to become a psychiatrist, but she was never able to muster the will to finish school or start a career. She said she was hobbled by her depression and autism and borderline personality disorder. Now she was tired of living. Despite, she said, being in love with her boyfriend, she recalled her psychiatrist telling her that they'd tried everything. There was nothing more they could do for her. It's never going to get any better. At that point, she said, rather than looking for a better psychiatrist, she's decided to die. I was always very clear that if it doesn't get better, I can't do this anymore. Now, some ethicists in Germany actually say that euthanasia is not the last resort. It's now a default option. So you're saying, well, Bob, that's overseas. What about New Zealand? Okay, well, let's have a look at some New Zealand cases. A Napier couple whose profoundly intellectually disabled son died last year want to change the assisted dying legislation so that it would allow legal guardians to protect their children from an undignified death. Now, it's not actually a child when they died, because their son died at the age of 20. He had a profound disability, cerebral palsy and epilepsy. He was plagued by frequent chest infections, and after 2 weeks hospitalisation for an infection in mid-2022, doctors told the parents they were nearing the end of what could be done for the infections, that the next serious infection could prove fatal. And so they applied to the assisted dying service, the euthanasia service of Te Whatu Ora. They wanted an exemption. They wanted an exemption to the criteria that the person wishing to end their life must be competent to make an informed decision about assisted dying. And they also wanted an exemption to the requirement that the person wishing to end their life must be suffering from a terminal illness that is likely to end their life within 6 months. Well, he actually qualifies under the terminal requirement, likely to die in the next 6 months. But they want to have euthanasia even for people who don't give their consent. And they warn that if their request was declined, they may challenge the decision to the Human Rights Review Tribunal on behalf of the wider intellectually disabled community members that lack the capacity. Right, they sound like activists. You read on a little and guess who the father is the uncle of, Lucretia Seals, the campaigner for our current euthanasia law. I found something interesting that I never knew when this debate first started. Many people don't know that Lucretia Seals' cancer was diagnosed in 2011. She was given just weeks to live. But she had treatment, including surgery, which was successful, and she did sadly pass away, but it was 4 years later, in June 2015. 4 years on from the weeks to live. The original prognosis wasn't accurate. And so she campaigned for 4 years for the right to euthanasia, which, if it was already legal, as it is now, she would have missed those 4 years. And she died peacefully at home from her illness. Now, there's also this one in the New Zealand Herald in March 2022. Remember that date. The family of a Wellington teenager diagnosed with a rare form of cancer say they will go to the ends of the earth to find a cure if that's what it takes. 15-year-old Otis Hill is a musician who dreams of being an audio engineer. In February, he was diagnosed with desmoplastic small round cell tumour. It's an incredibly rare, aggressive cancer. And the rare diagnosis came as a complete shock to the family, who had been told it was most likely to be lymphoma. The parents said it floored them, and the defeatist attitude of the Christchurch specialist they had been sent to was shocking too. The doctor said there was basically no point in a second opinion, and we can make him comfortable here in Christchurch and he can do some bungee jumps. For Otis and his family, that was not an option. Now, here's the next bit of coverage of Otis. Note the date, 10th of February, 2024. A Wellington teenager who has lived with a rare and terminal cancer for more than 2 years says it's his love of music which has kept him fighting. When the real diagnosis was revealed, the family was told to go home and make him comfortable, as he had only months to live. 2 years on, Hill has defied all odds and is still alive. Yes, if he was 18 or older, he would have had qualified for euthanasia, and he and his family would have missed him recording an album and many other things. Next one, 1st of April this year in the New Zealand Herald, about Michelle Leggett, a prominent Auckland poet. And it says this: "We're looking at a PET scan you did yesterday and there is no active lymphoma. You are in remission." As Leggett burst into tears, a young research student in the room scrambled for the nearest box of tissues. It was a surreal moment, just like the day, not more than a year before, she'd been given only a year to live. And this cell therapy, which a patient's immune cells are collected, genetically modified to recognise and kill their cancer, then given back to them as treatment. For Leggett, the difference was life and death. It's quite simple. If I hadn't been able to access this, I wouldn't be here now. And if she'd been able to access euthanasia, which she qualified for, she wouldn't now be enjoying remission. And then this one from February just gone. Janie Tefata was told in January 2023 her teenage daughter had only 9 months to live. Now, note that this article is 13 months later. Malone's tumour had shrunk after she tried a different treatment, and she has outlived her given life expectancy. The tumour that was once the size of a golf ball was now half that size, added to Fata, who is the mother. We just want it to shrink away to nothing. Malone will return to school this year for year 13 after taking last year off. Now, you'll notice, that's a beautiful story, isn't it? You'll notice that all of these New Zealand stories are in the media, but none of them, not one of them, makes the connection to euthanasia or the law problem when the prognosis is wrong or the palliative care is insufficient. The New Zealand Herald reports this. Let me get the right page. A specialist paediatric palliative care doctor says New Zealand is falling behind other nations in its care of terminally ill children, and the government must step up to help. A Wellington charity founded to provide specialist care for tamariki children aged 24 to 19 years needs more funding, and an anonymous donor privately funds the charity, but that funding will only last until April 2025. Dr. Amanda Evans is one of only 2 paediatric palliative care specialists in New Zealand. There's absolutely no after-hours service funded in New Zealand for paediatric palliative care. Isn't that shocking? But when will there be calls for euthanasia for children, as in Belgium? And then I saw this article, and it was a blog by Ian Powell, who's the executive director of the salaried, who used to be the director of the medical salaried specialists, the union representing senior doctors and dentists in New Zealand. And it said this: a study of paediatric palliative care in 2021 placed New Zealand at what is labelled level 4, which is in line with other developed nations. Last year, it fell dramatically, putting it on level 2, which is in par with developing nations like Ethiopia and Cameroon. 3 reasons behind this dramatic decline: worsening shortages with health professionals leaving the workforce, increasing numbers of patients needing the service, lack of funding. So we fund euthanasia, but we don't properly fund palliative care and hospices. You can see where this is going, can't you? But the soft sell for expanding euthanasia are now coming thick and fast. So starting in January with this one in the New Zealand Herald, a New Zealand woman with, ironically, the article starts with a warning. This story discusses suicide. How do we discourage suicide when we talk about assisting suicide? But it says a New Zealand woman with multiple degenerative illnesses is begging the government to change the assisted dying rule so she can die with dignity. The rule currently requires that a patient has a terminal illness, but New Zealanders with degenerative, not necessarily terminal diseases, say the restrictions leave them in severe pain without an end in sight. She meets 4 of the 5 criteria for assisted dying, but because it's not terminal, she can't have it. She says, I should have died 10 years ago. Her decline in health started with severe daily joint dislocations and constant pain in her early 30s. So that's actually 20 years ago. Now, the story also quotes Social Justice Aotearoa CEO, who I've never heard of, Jackie Foster, created a petition to change the End of Life Choice Act to enable people suffering from degenerative diseases to use the end of life legislation. When the end of life referendum went to the vote, I voted no, but now having lost a family member to cancer and seeing Nicole's journey on a personal level, I have thought about it and now support the legislation. And the Herald then gave promotion to the petition and the link. I checked it, it closed a month ago, and despite all this promotion it had, ironically it only had about 3,300 signatures. And actually what that tells you is that the 66% who voted yes in the 2020 referendum actually voted for a very conservative version of a euthanasia law. I mean, it's not good, but it's still relatively conservative at the moment. But unfortunately, for activists, it was a foot in the door, which they want now to open wide. And the latest case or campaign by the media for euthanasia is this one about Tracy Hickman. And look, please note, the issue isn't about her personally, but she wanted to use her sad death and her condition to campaign on this issue. Have a watch.
Hi there, my name's Tracy Hickman. I'm 57 years old and I have terminal breast cancer. So the reason we're talking today is that I've made a decision about the end of my life, and I want to use the End of Life Choice Act to make the decision to die. And I'm going to be dying 2 weeks today. So February 2023 is when I found out it was back. And it was quite aggressive. So there were tumours in my spine, in my lungs, in my chest wall, in my lymph nodes. I managed still to run a couple of marathons that were on my list and get those out of the way, despite the fact that, I had the cancer. And I started treatment as soon as I got back from that last marathon. The treatment was aggressive, it was harsh, and it's had some horrendous side effects. And really it's those side effects that were one of the main drivers for not wanting to carry on, but also the fact that I can't do the things that I love anymore. I can't work anymore, I can't travel anymore, and I can't run anymore. And I feel like I'm not me anymore. So the people that I love aren't with the person that they know and love. And I think for all of those reasons, life has become unbearable. So 2 weeks today, which is going to be the day that I'm going to die, I am going to have a wonderful breakfast. It's my favourite meal, so I'm going to make sure it's pretty good. I'm going to make sure there's some chocolate in there. And then I'm going to head to a beach with some of my closest friends and family. And I'm going to pass away looking at the waves, listening to the waves, and with the people I love. And it's going to be fast, it's going to be gentle. I can't think of a better way to go. I know that the pain is going to end, and I'm in pain all day, every day. The pain relief is really good. It does reduce the pain, but I never get rid of it. I do worry about the people I'm leaving behind and what I'm doing to them, and that's probably the worst part of it, is knowing that I could possibly get some treatment and be around a little bit longer and just exist for longer, but just existing is not how I live my life. I've always had the pedal to the floor and done everything I could possibly do. I've lived a really full life. I've had a wonderful life, and just existing and having no purpose isn't how I want to be.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch, isn't it? It was the side effects of the treatment that she'd had enough of. She says she can't do the things she wants to do. She's not me anymore, she says, so the people aren't with the person they know and love. Is that how we give love to people? She says, I could get treatment and exist longer, but I can't have the pedal to the metal, to the floor anymore. No purpose. Is that really the case? It seems very sad, but here's my concern, is that the message for those whose lifestyle changes as they age or suffer an injury or become disabled in some way, is that the message we want them to receive? To me, that sounds a dangerous message about how we must control everything, and if we can't. But this is part of the campaign, including she also did a long podcast with broadcaster Dom Harvey. Let me just show you a little clip of that.
Because I want to be really open about the decisions I've made about going through the assisted death, and maybe I could have a bit of a legacy in helping people understand that there's still people who don't realise it's legal in New Zealand, that it's coming up for review at the end of the year, to make sure that it definitely gets through again, to get people talking about it, because it was really hard when I was going through. I'm lucky at the moment the Guardian newspaper has had a whole series of articles about assisted death, about ways to do it, like getting the whole family together rather than just being one person and a doctor, of getting people together and having it as a bit of a celebration of your life to go, rather than being this secretive thing, getting people talking about it. And if by being public about this now, I can get someone else talking about it, talking to their family about it, or someone else considering it as an option, as something that they're willing to voice out loud, then I think it's worth it.
Yeah, part of me always wonders, are they marketing it themselves, or do the media want them to talk about it and then they almost feel locked into it? I just don't know the answer to that. But they also had an article about the day of her death in the media and the advice she had written down for others. Interestingly, as I read it, I thought, well, actually, that's the kind of advice anyone would give in their final days without euthanasia. It's what they want their friends to know, how they'd like to be treated, what they need. As I read the list, I thought, actually, that's probably the same advice my father would have given in his final days, as he was surrounded by family at home. But this is a special news item and feature because it's about assisted suicide. Euthanasia. Sorry, it's assisted death. Sounds much nicer, doesn't it? And you'll probably note that you won't get tributes printed in the New Zealand Herald when you or I die, but when the media are promoting euthanasia, then you do. And it actually says in the article here, a woman who decided to end her life by way of assisted dying on a New Zealand beach, surrounded by her loved ones, has been remembered as an example and inspiration for friends and colleagues. In her words, it was to be a fast and gentle end to a life in which she'd always had her pedal to the floor, her obituary read. And interestingly, it also said, her obituary said, I'm not going to let living with cancer stop me running. The article also says that in April, she was told she had 2 to 3 months to live, but 1 month later, she chose to die. And the article then continues with an explainer of the law, just in case you didn't know about it. Now, nobody who died in a hospice with superb palliative care from doctors and nurses have had an article like this. Nobody who died in hospital or died at home surrounded by loved ones have had this marketing campaign. You know why? Because we don't really like talking about the process of death and those final days and how it ended, unless it's euthanasia and we want the law to be expanded. And one of our concerns expressed during the recent euthanasia debate and referendum, and now all this messaging in the media and the soft sell of expanding the law, was the reality that terminally ill people are vulnerable to direct and indirect pressure from family, caregivers, medical professionals, as well as self-imposed pressure. That's part of the reason they have the gag clause to stop doctors suggesting euthanasia, because they understand this pressure that may be on the patient. They may come to feel euthanasia would be the right thing to do. They've had a good innings. They don't want to be a burden to their nearest and dearest. It's virtually impossible to detect those subtle emotional levels of coercion at the best of times. But because we've legalized it, we've normalized it. No longer is the option off the table. It's clearly on the table now. Sadly, even my local hospice offers euthanasia. But you probably won't see the puff pieces about coercion or the cheapness of euthanasia versus palliative care, or the impact of euthanasia on members of families who disagree with their decision and want to care for them in that final season. You won't hear those. But assisting suicide is not the answer. We can die with dignity without euthanasia. We'd encourage you to go to our website, protect.org.nz. There's the website address there, protect.org.nz. And check out our fact sheet about what the law currently says, and you'll quickly understand we definitely don't want it expanded. They want to grease up the slippery slope. Don't let them.